Good morning, class. We're going to begin by taking a look at an introduction to Shakespeare. Next week, we're going to begin Romeo and Juliet, and we will watch the play and study a couple of key passages to better understand the Shakespearean language. To be literate and cultured, you need to be exposed to Shakespeare, and very specifically, I think you ought to know Romeo and Juliet. We're going to start by looking at Shakespearean language. We will do that by looking at his poetry, specifically the sonnets. Sonnets are probably what scared you away from poetry. This style from the Renaissance is formal. It has meter and pattern and rhythm and beat. If you ever tried to spit a rap, you probably understand it isn't as easy as it sometimes looks. Maybe you can get a rhyme going, but to keep the beat and actually say something sensible with meaning requires choosing the best word for each place in the line. Sonnets are carefully planned out with beat, rhyme, and meaning. They are very precise poetry. How do we know when we're looking at a sonnet? Well, sonnets all have something in common, and Shakespeare is not the thing that all sonnets have in common. Though he is the most well-known poet in terms of sonnet writing, he was not actually the first. The first was a man named Petrarch, and another great Renaissance poet, Edmund Spenser, was the other great sonnet writer. So Shakespeare is not the only sonnet writer that we know of and have his work. Shakespeare, though, composed over 150 sonnets, and they were compiled in a book called The Lover's Complaint. Shakespeare's sonnets mostly have end rhymes, and they're about relationships, love, beauty, and time. We're going to talk about the meter and the rhyme scheme in the coming slides. The subjects of Shakespeare's sonnet were three. There was a fair young man, there was a rival poet, and there was a dark lady. And typically, Shakespeare's sonnets would fall into one of these categories. The fair young man that he wrote to was just somebody that he admired from afar. There's been a lot of question over the last 500 years about Shakespeare's sexuality, and that's not for this class, but I think it's fair to say after studying these sonnets that it wasn't necessarily a romantic affection that he showed, rather than an appreciation for how beautiful this human being was. The rival poet is a contemporary, somebody writing at the same time as Shakespeare, and so a little bit of a rap battle going on between them where they diss each other and praise each other whenever it's appropriate in their poetry. And the third subject that Shakespeare writes about is a dark lady, and this would be a black mistress, and that could mean anything from an African woman to an English non-blonde, but basically she was known as the dark lady. And so these are the three things that he typically writes about, though his themes are many. His sonnets follow the English convention form, which is 14 lines of iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter is the poetic meter of 5 feet, which is 2 syllables for each foot, and those syllables come in an unstressed, stressed pattern. And so there will be a total of 10 syllables in each of the 14 lines of a sonnet. The sonnet composition is, as I said, it's 14 lines, and they're typically divided into 4 stanzas. The first 12 lines are divided into 3 stanzas that we call quatrains. These are stanzas with 4 lines in them. And each of those stanzas introduces and then expands whatever the theme or the idea or the issue or the problem of the sonnet is going to be. And so the poet puts it out there in the first 3 stanzas. And then in the final 2 lines, he resolves the theme, the issue, or the problem. And we call those final 2 lines that rhyme a couplet. The rhyme scheme for Shakespeare's sonnets is an A-B, A-B, C-D, C-D, E-F, E-F, G-G formula, and the G-G is actually the 2 lines in the couplet. So I'm going to show you in the next slide how that rhyme scheme works, and we represent the rhyme with little letters. So what we know is in the first stanza, the first line and the third line are going to rhyme with each other, the second line and the fourth line are going to rhyme with each other. All the letters change here in the second stanza, and so what that tells us is the rhyme is going to change. And so this fifth line will rhyme with the seventh, and the sixth line will rhyme with the eighth. We see in the third stanza the rhyme changes again, and so we have the ninth and the 11th and the 10th and the 12th lines rhyming, and then the last two lines in our couplet rhyme. And this rhyme that I'm talking about is end rhyme. It happens at the end of each line. Only 3 of Shakespeare's sonnets don't actually follow this pattern. So this is Sonnet 116, and we're not actually going to study it. You can read it on your own, but I just wanted to show you how rhyme scheme works. So here we know mines rhymes with finds, and so those 2 rhymes are marked with the letter A. Love rhymes with remove, and so those 2 rhymes are marked with the letter B. Mark and bark are the C rhyme. Shaken and taken are the D rhyme. Cheeks and weeks are represented by the letter E. Come and doom are represented by the letter F, and proved and loved is represented by the letter G. You'll notice a couple rhymes that aren't exact rhymes, like love and move. They don't actually rhyme, but they're called approximate rhyme. They almost rhyme. And that's also true down here with come and doom. They don't actually rhyme exactly, but they have an almost rhyme. Same with proved and loved. And that's a common, prove and love is a common rhyme from the Renaissance in sonnets. So that's how rhyme scheme works, and we just stick these little letters here to show that there is rhyme. In the event that minds and finds would have continued with like hind or rind or something like that down here, we would repeat the letter B. If the rhyme is similar to that of another stanza, it would be repeated. But all of Shakespeare's rhyme scheme follow the ABAB, CD, EFEF, GG format. And the next thing I want to talk about are the themes that appear in not only Shakespeare's sonnets, but throughout all of literature and poetry. And these are 3 very common themes, and so I just want to spend a minute talking about them. They're symbols and metaphors, and they're very repeated throughout music, movies, even everyday speech. And the first thing we're going to do is identify what these common metaphors are, and then what we'll do is see how Shakespeare uses them in his sonnets. So the first one is the seasons as metaphors for our lives. You'll remember we talked about this in class, but I'll explain it here very quickly for you again. We have 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. Spring represents birth or renewal. Everything that was dead in nature comes back to life again in the spring. Summer represents the peak of temperatures, the peak time of year to enjoy life. This is probably the prime of a person's life, maybe between the ages of 24 and 45. These are the years when a person has already learned enough to be independent. They're making choices on their own. They're making some money. There's a lot of opportunity that comes to you in the prime of your life. It's when your life is considered strong. Fall, then, is the crossing over the threshold of middle age. If life is divided into 2 halves, this would be the first part of the second half of your life, usually represented by about age 50 and beyond. You consider yourself in the second half of your life. And then winter is often representing old age, the end, death. And it's because in winter everything freezes over. We even see these patterns that I just described to you in nature. So the second metaphor is the metaphor of time of day. And time of day is also a metaphor for the stages of our life. Dawn is the start of our life. Morning represents our youth when we're still learning. Afternoon, again, represents the peak of life. So afternoon would be the same as summertime in the seasons of a year. Evening or sunset represents that aging of our life, everything past the halfway point. Twilight, of course, would be when we are elderly, and the end of life and is often represented by night and death. So anytime we see nighttime, darkness, winter, midnight, all of these ideas represent the end of life. The third metaphor that I mentioned are the stages of fire as a metaphor for life. Think of the stages of fire. When you first start to build a fire, you start with just a spark. Sometimes it's even hard to get going, and life is very similar to that. And then that spark starts to grow, and a couple logs catch flame. The fire starts to build. This is the youth of our life, the early part of a fire. If you've ever been around a campfire, though, you know that a growing fire, the first flame catches on, and then some small twigs begin burning, and then the logs sort of catch. This all represents childhood. It grows into your youth. But when you get to that roaring part of the fire, that's the peak. That would be compared to summertime, and that would also be compared to the afternoon of your life, this peak point. And it's at that point that the fire is radiating the most warmth and the most strength. And from there, it starts to die back. It gets smaller and less fierce, just as we do as we're aging, until eventually it's just embers or glowing coals, and then the final days of life. The end of life in a fire is marked by ash, and ash is a very common symbol of death. So this is your introduction to sonnets and some three key themes that you encounter in sonnets, and you'll use all of this information to move through the example sonnets that I'm going to explain to you next.